Daniel Mercer stood outside that supermarket with $60 in his wallet, the last $60 he had, until next payday, carefully counted and budgeted down to the cent to feed 3 people for 7 days. He had already written the list. He had already done the math. But then he saw the old woman sitting alone on the bench near the entrance, trembling hands clutching a pharmacy bag, a small boy burning with fever slumped against her shoulder. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked. What he did next would change everything he thought he understood about luck, kindness, and the kind of man his late wife always believed he was. Daniel Mercer, 38 years old, drove a white pickup truck with a cracked side mirror he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. The town of Millfield, Ohio knew him the way small towns know their tradespeople by his truck, by the rust-colored toolbox in the bed, by the way he always said, "Yes, ma'am," and showed up when he said he would. He had a business card that read, D. Mercer Plumbing, licensed and insured, and a phone that rang just enough to keep the lights on. Sometimes, not even that. His wife Sarah had died 4 years ago, breast cancer diagnosed, late gone faster than anyone thought possible. She was 33. Daniel had been in the middle of fixing a burst pipe at a school gymnasium when his phone rang. He remembered sitting down on the wet floor and not getting up for a very long time. That was the version of the story nobody heard. The version people heard was that he pulled himself together, raised his kids, kept his business running. Both versions were true, and neither one was the whole picture. Lily was 13. She made lunches on school mornings without being asked, kept Owen's backpack by the door the night before, and never not once asked Daniel for anything that cost money unless she truly needed it. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of watching a room without appearing to watch it. Owen was 7, still certain the world was mostly good and mostly fair, which Daniel considered a gift worth protecting as long as possible. October in Ohio was the worst month for plumbing work. Pipes that had been quietly failing all summer started giving out all at once. But October was also when people started comparing quotes, and a new company called All Flow Solutions had come into Millfield with polished trucks and digital invoicing and prices 30% lower than anything Daniel could match. He'd lost 2 contracts in 1 week. His landlord was patient, but not infinitely patient. That Friday morning, Daniel sat in his truck outside Millfield Super Fresh, a folded piece of paper on his knee, going over the same numbers for the 4th time. $60. 7 days. 3 people. He had written out every item, every meal, right down to which brand of oatmeal was cheaper by the ounce. He was pushing the cart back through the parking lot, groceries not yet purchased, still running the math in his head, when he heard it, a soft, broken sound from the bench near the entrance. Not a cry exactly. More like someone trying very hard not to cry and not quite succeeding. He almost kept walking. He had things to figure out, and other people's problems were on most days a luxury he could not afford to take on. But his feet stopped before his mind made the decision. Standing beside the bench was a woman who looked to be in her mid-60s, dressed simply in a navy cardigan and flat shoes, white hair pulled back neatly. She held a pharmacy bag in both hands, and her hands were trembling, not from cold, because the morning was mild, but from something else. Pressed against her side was a small boy, 5 years old. Forehead glazed with sweat, eyes closed, the dead weight of a child too sick to stay upright on his own. 3 people had passed the bench in the time it took Daniel to notice the scene. One had glanced at the woman and looked away. One had walked faster. One had slowed, said something, and moved on when the conversation turned to needing money. Daniel walked over. He crouched down to the boy's level first, an instinct the same one he used when Owen was sick, and then looked up at the woman. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" He already knew it wasn't. Her name was Eleanor. She said it quietly, as though she wasn't sure she deserved to take up space. She explained that her grandson, Tommy, had been running a fever since the night before, that the doctor had given her a prescription that morning, that she'd managed to pay for half of it before realizing she had left her wallet in her car that her driver had taken back to the garage because she hadn't thought she'd need it again so soon. Her phone had died. She didn't know how to use one of those payment applications everyone kept recommending to her. The rest of the prescription cost $55. She had tried calling her son, but the call wouldn't go through. She had been sitting on this bench for 40 minutes. Daniel looked at Tommy. The boy's lips were dry. His small hand was wrapped around his grandmother's wrist in the particular way sick children hold on to adults, not for comfort exactly, but because the body knows what it needs and reaches for it without thinking. Eleanor watched Daniel look at her grandson, and her jaw tightened, the way a person's jaw tightens when they are trying to hold themselves together in front of a stranger. He looked down at the folded paper in his pocket. He thought about the 7 days and the $60 and the oatmeal that was cheaper by the ounce. He thought about Owen asking last Tuesday night in that matter-of-fact voice he used for everything, whether their family was poor. Daniel had said no. He was no longer entirely sure that was true. He took the $60 out of his wallet, all of it, and held it out toward Eleanor. She shook her head immediately. "I can't take your money. I don't even know you," Daniel said. "The kid needs medicine. That's enough to know." He waited and she took it, and he walked her back through the sliding glass doors to the pharmacy counter and stood beside her while the prescription was filled. He used the last $5 in his jacket pocket to call a cab from the payphone near the entrance, the one he'd always assumed nobody used anymore, and he waited on the sidewalk until the cab arrived, watched Eleanor fold Tommy carefully into the back seat, watched the car pull away with the small boy's head resting against the window. Then Daniel pushed his empty cart to the return rack and walked back to his truck. The drive home took 11 minutes. He sat in the driveway for 3 of them before going inside. The refrigerator held 4 eggs, half a block of cheddar getting close to the edge, a quarter bottle of ketchup, and enough pasta for one decent meal if he stretched it. He made dinner anyway. Pasta with butter, a fried egg on top for Owen, because Owen liked eggs on everything, frozen vegetables from the back of the freezer, because vegetables counted. He set the table, filled 3 glasses with water, and called his kids to eat. Owen sat down, looked at the plate, and looked at Daniel with the calm and honest assessment of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned to pretend. "How come there's no meat? I thought Friday was chicken night." Daniel picked up his fork. "I felt like mixing it up," he said. "Keeps things interesting." Owen considered this with great seriousness, for a moment shrugged and started eating. Lily said nothing. She had noticed the wallet on the counter open and flat, the way wallets only look when there's nothing in them. She ate everything on her plate without commenting. After dinner, she washed the dishes. After Owen was asleep, Daniel heard her moving quietly in her room. He didn't know until later that she had texted the owner of the bakery 2 streets over, a woman named Mrs. Garfield, who let Lily help out on weekend mornings. Cash-in-hand money. Lily had never once mentioned to her father to ask for extra shifts the following weekend. Daniel sat on the back step with a mug of coffee that had gone cold. The yard was dark, and the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the trees, and the air smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke. He took out his phone and opened the one photo he always went back to when things got hard. Sarah at the kitchen table laughing at something just off camera. One hand raised like she was about to make a point. He didn't say anything out loud. He just looked at it for a while. He told himself he hadn't made a mistake. He almost believed it. Monday started badly and got worse. Daniel was under a kitchen sink at a neighbor's house, a $40 job, the kind that barely covered gas when his phone buzzed with a number he recognized. His landlord, Gary Phelps, who was a reasonable man right up until the middle of the month, when he became a different kind of man entirely. The rent had a $200 gap in it from last month's shortfall. Gary wanted it closed by Friday, "I'm not trying to be difficult, Daniel," he said, in the tone of a man who was absolutely trying to be difficult. "But I've got someone else interested in the unit." Daniel said he understood. He stayed under the sink for another minute after the call ended, staring at the corroded pipe above him, his jaw tight. He came home to find Lily at the kitchen table backpack, still on not doing homework. That was how he knew it was serious. She looked up and said, "Mr. Patterson called today about the semester fee." The school had a policy students with outstanding balances over 90 days could not sit for final exams. The amount owed was $320. It was not large in the way that truly large things are not large. It was impossible in the way that impossible things always seem reasonable from the outside. Lily reached into her backpack and placed $80 on the table. It was in tens and fives, soft from being folded and refolded many times. "I've been saving," she said very quietly. "From the bakery. I know you didn't know about that, and I'm sorry, but I wanted to help." Daniel looked at the money for a long time. He looked at his daughter, 13 years old, with her mother's eyes, and her mother's way of being braver than she had any right to be. He picked up the money and held it out to her. "Put it back," he said. She started to protest. "Lily," he said softer now. "Put it back." He stood up and went into his bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. He stayed there for about 10 minutes. Then he came back out and made a decision. He was not going to let his daughter carry his weight. He was going to go door to door if he had to. He was going to find work starting tomorrow morning before the kids woke up. Tuesday, he was out of the driveway by 6:45 with his toolbox and a stack of old business cards from the glove compartment. He knocked on 14 doors across 2 neighborhoods. Most people were polite in the way that means no. 3 said they'd call him later. 2 said they'd already scheduled all flow. One elderly man, Mr. Denton on Birchwood Lane, let him fix a dripping faucet for $20 and gave him a cup of coffee and a slice of banana bread, warm from the oven, which turned out to be the best part of the day by a considerable margin. By 3 in the afternoon, he had $45 a sore knee from crouching on tile floors and the specific exhaustion that comes not from working hard, but from working hard and getting nowhere. He stopped at a gas station and bought a gallon of milk and a box of cereal and sat in the parking lot eating a granola bar from the cup holder, and he gave himself exactly 5 minutes to feel how tired he was. Then he drove home. Owen was on the porch when he pulled in the way he always was. He ran to the truck and grabbed Daniel's hand before his father had both feet on the ground. "You look like the time you lost at that card game at Uncle Brent's," he said, with no particular cruelty, just the honest observation of someone who remembered everything. Daniel stared at him. "You were 5 years old," he said. "How do you remember that?" Owen shrugged like it was a silly question and walked back inside. Daniel stood in the driveway a moment longer, and something moved through his chest that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. But that night after the kids were in bed, he sat at the kitchen table and did the math again. $45. Rent gap of $200. School fee of $320. Outstanding balance on the truck registration. The numbers didn't change no matter how long he looked at them, and they didn't care that he had knocked on 14 doors or fixed Mr. Denton's faucet or eaten a granola bar in a gas station parking lot. The numbers were just the numbers. Wednesday came in cold and gray, the first real cold snap of fall, the kind that smells like the end of something. Daniel was in the crawl space beneath the house, trying to patch a pipe that had started seeping something he'd been putting off, because the parts cost money he didn't have when Gary called again. He'd moved the deadline. Not Friday. Thursday. There was a young couple who could move in by the weekend, Gary said, and he was sorry, but he had a business to run. Daniel climbed out of the crawl space with mud on his elbows and stood in his backyard and said very calmly that he would have it sorted by tomorrow. He didn't know how. The sky above the yard was the color of old concrete, and the trees were almost bare. He found out later, much later, because Lily didn't tell him directly that she had called her Aunt Carol that afternoon. He was standing in the hallway outside Lily's room when he heard enough of it. Carol's voice on speaker, gentle and careful, saying that maybe Daniel should think about whether the house was too much to carry on his own, whether a smaller apartment somewhere cheaper might be worth considering. Lily had said she would pass that along. She hadn't passed it along, but Daniel had heard enough. He went to the kitchen, turned off the light, and sat in the dark. He was not angry at Carol. He was not even angry at the situation exactly. He was out of moves, and he knew it, and the knowing sat in his chest like a stone. A 13-year-old was calling her aunt to solve a problem that was his to solve because he had given $60 to a stranger outside a grocery store and now had nothing left to show for it, except a family that was trying its best to hold together without admitting it was straining. For the first time since Friday morning, he turned the question over in his mind and actually looked at it. Had he made a mistake? Thursday morning, 7:02. Daniel had been awake since 5. He was at the kitchen table with cold coffee and the same folded piece of paper with the same numbers when his phone rang. Unknown number, Ohio area code. He answered because that was what you did when you were a one-man operation, with no room left to miss a call. The voice was a woman's calm, measured the kind of voice that spent its life in conference rooms. Is this Daniel Mercer, plumber, Elm Street? He said yes. She said someone would like to meet with him that morning if he was available regarding a job opportunity. She gave him an address downtown. He wrote it on the back of the paper, with the numbers, asked no questions. Said he'd be there at 10. He looked up the address before leaving. The building that came back was not a house. It was a 10-story office block at the corner of Commerce and Fifth Stone Facade, Riverview, with a carved name above the entrance he could read in the photo Haynes Construction Group. He sat with that for a moment, then put on the cleanest shirt he owned and drove downtown. He parked 2 blocks away where the meter was free and walked in carrying nothing, no toolbox, no clipboard, and gave his name at the reception desk. The lobby had slate floors and tall windows and a wall of framed articles about the company's history, going back to its founding in 1984. He was reading one of them, still trying to understand what kind of job a construction conglomerate could want with a one-man plumbing operation from Elm Street, when he heard footsteps crossing the floor behind him. He turned around. The woman walking toward him wore a charcoal blazer and fitted slacks. White hair pinned back neatly, posture perfectly straight. She moved like someone who had been making decisions in this building for a very long time. It took him 3 full seconds, and then his brain caught up all at once the way it does when something impossible turns out to be true. Eleanor. She stopped a few feet away and she looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite an apology. Something in between, something that had clearly been considered before this moment arrived. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. The marble floor, the polished brass elevator doors, the receptionist pretending not to watch. None of it made sense, alongside the woman who had been sitting on a bench outside super fresh 6 days ago, with a trembling pharmacy bag and a sick grandchild, and $55 she didn't have. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "thank you for coming in." They sat across from each other at a conference room table, with a view of the river, gray-green in the October light. Eleanor told him what the bench had not shown. She was the founder and chairman of Haynes Construction Group Commercial Real Estate and Property Management, 12 properties across Ohio family-owned since the company started. Her husband, William, had built the first office complex in Millfield in 1986. He died 11 years ago, and Eleanor had run the company alone since. Last Friday, she had driven herself to the pediatrician because her driver had taken the car in for servicing. She had left her wallet in the glove compartment. Her phone died in the waiting room. She was 65 years old. She had managed $100 million negotiations, and she could not operate a contactless payment application. She said this without embarrassment, the way someone states a fact they have made peace with. I sat on that bench for 43 minutes, she said. I counted. People walked past. Most of them looked at me the way people look at problems they've decided belong to someone else. She paused. And then you came by. I watched you in the parking lot before you approached. I saw you take out that paper and look at it. I could see from 20 feet away that you were counting something, and that there wasn't much to count. Daniel said nothing. You gave me everything you had in your wallet. Then you used the last of your pocket change to call a cab you didn't even get to ride in. She looked at him steadily. Tommy is fine, by the way. He was running around the backyard by Sunday morning. Then she told him what she was offering. All 12 of her properties in Ohio had aging infrastructure pipes and systems installed in the 1980s and 90s, overdue for modernized maintenance contracts. She had been trying for 2 years to find an independent licensed contractor for the ongoing work. Someone who wasn't a large firm that sent different crews every time and billed for jobs that never fully materialized. Someone who showed up when they said they would. Someone whose name was on the truck. The annual contract value across all 12 properties was $180,000. She wanted to offer it to Daniel. He would need to bring on at least one additional technician. She would give him 60 days before the first scheduled job began. Daniel was quiet for a long time. The number sat on the table between them, like something neither of them quite wanted to touch yet. He looked out the window at the river. Then he looked back at Eleanor and said, I want to be clear about something. I didn't do what I did so that something like this would happen. Eleanor nodded without hesitation. I know that, she said. That is precisely why I'm here. Another moment of quiet. Then Daniel asked, what does the first property actually look like, the scope? She slid a folder across the table. He opened it. He read for 2 minutes, asked 3 questions, practical, specific, the kind of questions that told Eleanor everything she needed to know about whether her read on this man was accurate. It was. They shook hands. He signed the letter of intent before he stood up to leave. He sat in his truck for 5 minutes with the engine off, holding the folder. He looked at the letter of intent on top, then out through the windshield at the river. Then he started the truck, drove 2 blocks to his parking meter, fed it a quarter for the time he still owed, and drove home. He got back at 4:30. Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework, or positioned as though doing homework, because the pencil had not moved, and she had been listening for his truck. Owen was on the living room floor with a book he was definitely not reading. Both of them looked up the moment he walked in, with the particular alertness of children who have been trying to read the temperature of a room before anyone speaks. Daniel set his keys down, put the folder on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat. All right, he said. Let me tell you something that started last Friday. He told them everything. The parking lot, the woman on the bench, Tommy burning with fever against her shoulder, the pharmacy counter, the payphone, the cab, the empty wallet, the pasta dinner he'd called a change of pace. He told them about Monday and the phone call from Gary and the numbers that didn't work out no matter how many times he added them up. He told them about Tuesday's 14 doors and Mr. Denton's banana bread. He told them about sitting in the dark in the kitchen Wednesday night, running out of answers. And he told them about the lobby that morning and Eleanor walking across the slate floor and who she turned out to be when she was standing up straight in a conference room. Owen had his chin in both hands, mouth slightly open, not breathing noticeably. When Daniel finished, Owen said, So because you gave the grandma money for the medicine, the grandma gave you a whole big job. Daniel said that was roughly the shape of it. Owen processed this with intense seriousness for about 4 seconds. Then his face broke open. That is the best trade I have ever heard of, he announced. Does this mean we can have chicken tonight? Lily covered her mouth. Daniel laughed, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere lower than his chest, the kind he hadn't had in a while. Yeah, buddy, he said. We can absolutely have chicken tonight. Lily didn't laugh right away. She sat across from her father with that watching without watching expression, measuring, recalculating, checking which things were still standing and which had shifted. She had been doing this for 4 years, since the age of 9, since the day the world reorganized itself around an absence no one had planned for. Then something in her face let go. She pushed back her chair and walked around the table and put her arms around Daniel's shoulders, and he felt her exhale slow and long, the exhale of someone releasing something they hadn't realized they'd been holding. She didn't say much, just quietly against his shoulder. I keep thinking I have to hold everything together when you're not looking. I forget that you're already doing it. He held on. He didn't say she shouldn't have to feel that way. He didn't say that he'd gotten lucky because it wasn't luck, or it wasn't only luck. He didn't say anything that would turn the moment into a lesson, because it wasn't a lesson. It was just the two of them in a kitchen that smelled like old coffee and the beginning of October holding on. Dinner was loud and full, and Owen ate a chicken thigh and a half and declared it the greatest meal of his life, which he also said about most things he genuinely enjoyed, which was one of the better qualities a person could have. After the table was cleared and the dishes done, and Owen had fallen asleep on the couch with a cartoon still going, Daniel went to the kitchen drawer, where he kept the things that didn't have another home takeout menus, a battery of uncertain charge, a birthday candle from 3 years ago. The photograph was near the back. Sarah, at this same kitchen table laughing at something, just off frame, one hand raised, like she was about to make a point she never quite got to finish. He set it on the table beside the folder, with the letter of intent and the property schematics and the contract value that was going to change what the next year looked like for all 3 of them. He didn't say anything out loud. He just rested his hand on the photograph for a moment, the way you rest your hand on something that matters before you put it back where it belongs. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went to check on his kids.